It began with a whisper, not a war. A single line, buried in a classified U.S. cable, sent tremors through West Africa. It reads, "Deliver 60% of your oil and gold in 48 hours or face the consequences." No talks, no diplomacy, just a demand signed by the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. But this wasn't political. This was plunder in a suit and tie. They thought Burkina Faso would bow quietly. They thought Captain Ibrahim Traoré would tremble. They were wrong. Instead, he looked that ultimatum in the eyes and said, "Burkina Faso is not for sale." And from that moment, everything changed. Across the continent, from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, a new question began to rise. What happens when a small African nation dares to say no and means it? Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and join us for an Africa that no longer bows its head. But what no one knew was that a storm had already started behind closed doors. It did not arrive by email. It didn't come with a flag or fanfare. It came cloaked in shadow, a 7-page document stamped confidential, printed in thick ink, hand-delivered by a former U.S. military attaché, flanked by private American contractors, landed on Captain Ibrahim Traoré's desk before sunrise. He read it once, then again. Then he looked up at his intelligence chief and asked only one question: "Do they really think we are still theirs?" The document was blunt. Not a proposal, not a dialogue, a demand. Within 48 hours, the government of Burkina Faso was to cede 60% of its newly discovered oil production to U.S.-based corporations ExxonMobil, Chevron, Halliburton. In return, vague promises of infrastructure support and stability guarantees. It was business language twisted into imperial threat. But the most chilling line was buried near the end. Full cooperation will ensure protection from regime change. In other words, surrender your resources, or we will remove you. This wasn't diplomacy. It was blackmail, wrapped in polite grammar. To Washington, it was simple. Africa didn't need presidents. It needed placeholders compliant, quiet, grateful, men who signed what they were told to sign, and smiled while doing it. That had worked before, for decades. But Captain Traoré was not that man. And this was not that Africa. The document detailed everything. U.S.-led firms would control the export routes for Burkina Faso's gold. An economic advisory board made up of American and European consultants would oversee all future mining deals. In exchange, Traoré's government would receive vague security assistance, technology partnerships, and support for national elections. There was even an offer for media cooperation to manage perceptions during the transition of resource authority. It was economic colonialism in real time, disguised as partnership, sold as progress. But behind the legalese, one message stood out: obey or disappear, and it bore a signature in red ink. Donald J. Trump. Officially, Washington denied the document. They called it unauthorized, said Trump was acting alone, but no one stopped him. Because the truth was, this Trump didn't invent the system. He simply said out loud what the system had always believed. We don't care who runs Africa as long as we run what's under it. This was not the first time an African nation had been given such a choice. Libya had faced it. So had Congo. And each time, the price of saying no had been destruction, invasion, silence. But Traoré saw the pattern. He saw the strings. And this time, he decided to cut them. Inside the war room in Ouagadougou, Traoré looked around the table: military officers, economists, elders. He held the document in both hands, then dropped it in silence. "This," he said, "is what slavery looks like now. Not chains, but contracts." Then he stood, walked to the national flag, and spoke without hesitation. "They want 60% of our future. Then they will meet 100% of our resistance." He did not wait. He did not deliberate. He acted. The oil fields were locked down. Convoys rerouted. All foreign data access was suspended, and the country braced itself. Burkina Faso was not refusing a deal. It was refusing a system that told black nations their land was only valuable when someone else profited from it, that their gold could be taken, their oil drained, and their people pacified with aid and advice. And in that moment, before the media caught wind, before social feeds erupted, before embassies began dialing phones in panic, Traoré made one thing perfectly clear: Burkina Faso would not kneel, not to Wall Street, not to Langley, not to a man in a red tie. And so, began the war behind the war, the one waged in the shadows of media. They thought he would fold. When Captain Traoré refused the ultimatum, Washington shifted gears. The threats didn't stop, they just changed shape. Within days, Western media fired the first shots. CNN warned of economic collapse in Burkina Faso. BBC ran specials questioning Traoré's mental health. Fox News called him another Gaddafi in uniform. The message was clear: discredit the man, and you weaken the movement. But they underestimated one thing: the people. While talking heads in air-conditioned studios spat warnings, something powerful was brewing on the ground. From Ouagadougou's universities to the dusty villages of the Sahel, a different kind of resistance was rising, not with bullets, but with culture, voices, and pride. Students held teach-ins about sovereignty and resource justice. Young rappers turned Western news clips into protest anthems. One remix, looping CNN's headline "Traoré destabilizing the region," dropped over a heavy beat, went viral in 48 hours. If CNN hates you, you're doing something right. That became a catchphrase. Across social media, memes exploded. Images of Traoré standing tall on oil barrels, wrapped in the national flag. Captioned simply, "Unbought, unbossed, unbowed." But it wasn't just online noise. Women's groups began delivering supplies directly to soldiers guarding gold convoys. Community elders reactivated traditional networks to secure oil routes. Even school children joined the movement, drawing pictures of Africa standing tall, eyes glowing with defiance. Burkina Faso wasn't descending into chaos. It was awakening. And the smear campaign, it only made the fire burn hotter. Every time a Western outlet aired a hit piece, it spread like wildfire among Africa's youth, not as fear, but as fuel. Screens lit up with comments like, "They said Mandela was dangerous too. If they slander him, he must be doing something right." This is the Africa we've been waiting for. Even in the diaspora, support surged. Black Americans, Caribbean voices, South Africans abroad posted side-by-side comparisons of past African martyrs and Traoré. Malcolm, Sankara, Nkrumah, now Traoré. He had become more than a president. He was a symbol, and symbols can't be bombed. CIA analysts took notice. Surveillance drones flew tighter patterns. Private contractors moved near the Ghana border. Social media bots launched waves of disinformation, false leaks of corruption, fake audio clips, even forged documents alleging foreign bribes. But it all backfired. Because when the people are awake, you can't lull them back to sleep. And Traoré, he didn't blink. He didn't tweet. He acted quietly, efficiently, boldly. A steady hand in a storm. Every whisper of doubt, every article of slander only sharpened his image. He wasn't hiding. He was holding the line because he understood something Western media didn't. This war wasn't just about oil and gold. It was about dignity, memory, a future Africa could finally own. So when the headlines screamed unstable, his people heard uncompromised. When they shouted dictator, his people saw defender. And when they predicted collapse, his people whispered, "They're afraid." If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. What came next wasn't a retreat. It was a coalition. They said he stood alone. But by the time the dust began to settle, the world saw the truth. Within days of Captain Traoré's defiant rejection of the American ultimatum, the skies over Ouagadougou changed. 3 military planes touched down in quick succession, one from Mali, one from Niger, one from Guinea. They didn't carry bombs. They didn't carry threats. They carried brothers. Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali, General Abdourahmane Chiani of Niger, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya of Guinea. They came not as observers but as equals. Warriors, family. When they emerged from the presidential palace, they stood beside Traoré. No speeches, no translations, just one sentence that echoed across Africa. "If you touch Burkina Faso, you touch all of us." It wasn't a slogan. It was a doctrine. The birth of the AES Shield, a new kind of Pan-African pact, forged not in boardrooms but in the fire of resistance. Mali sent military advisors to protect the oil fields. Niger dispatched logistics teams to secure gold supply lines. Guinea opened its airspace for rapid response missions. For the first time in generations, African nations were defending one another on their own terms. But it wasn't just Africa watching. 2 days later, as U.S. media scrambled to spin the story, another plane landed quietly on the edge of the capital. No red carpets, no press conferences, just a delegation from China engineers, diplomats, And one bold offer: we'll build you an oil refinery in 90 days. And they meant it. Blueprints were shown, machinery sourced, contracts written without a single clause demanding land, debt, or submission. Alongside it came gold valuation systems that bypassed Western banks entirely. And the final piece: a digital trade mechanism powered by China's digital yuan, cutting out both the CFA franc and the US dollar in one clean stroke. Burkina Faso wouldn't just extract oil, it would refine, trade, and profit sovereign from soil to coin. And Russia, they followed suit. A massive Ilyushin military jet touched down next. No media coverage, just crates marked specialized defense assets, the kind that jam drones, block satellite tracking, and make CIA operators very nervous. Captain Ibrahim latest news spread across encrypted channels. Burkina Faso's skies are now shielded by Russian-grade tech. Back in Washington, panic set in. CNN called it a dangerous new axis. The State Department cried authoritarian encroachment. But the people, they weren't listening. Because to them, Traoré wasn't selling out. He was leveling the field. China and Russia weren't colonial invaders. They were tools, allies, cards in a new game played by Africa. For Africa, the headlines couldn't stop what was unfolding. In Bamako, crowds lifted signs, "Stand tall, Traoré." In Conakry, murals bloomed his face painted in bold colors, standing over barrels of gold. And online, one message spread like wildfire: "We don't need permission to rise." The West had expected another Gaddafi. What they got was a new doctrine, a new shield, a new story. Not of a lone leader, but of a continental awakening. And just when the world thought it was over, Trump logged in. The ultimatum had expired. The silence from Washington was deafening until 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time. Then came the tweet, in all caps, like a warning siren from a crumbling empire. Donald J. Trump broke the stillness with 7 words. Traoré just made the biggest mistake. Africa will pay for this. And just like that, the world held its breath. Markets dipped. Analysts scrambled. But in Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. When aides showed him the tweet, he reportedly smiled and said, "That's the sound of an empire losing control." But behind the bluster was a real threat. Satellite surveillance tripled over West Africa. U.S. Navy ships repositioned near the Gulf of Guinea. AFRICOM issued quiet warnings of regional instability. CIA-linked contractors appeared near the Ghanaian border. Inside Burkina Faso, the military went on high alert. Anti-air systems activated. Gold convoys rerouted. Special forces fortified oil zones. Yet while Washington fumed in silence, something remarkable happened. Africa stood up. In Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Dakar, thousands poured into the streets outside U.S. embassies. These were not ordinary protests. They were declarations. Placards read, "Touch Traoré, touch us all. Africa is not your minefield. Keep your democracy, we'll keep our dignity." In a continent long fractured by borders, this was something new: solidarity. Even black voices in the diaspora added fuel. From Atlanta to Kingston, London to Accra, voices rose through murals, videos, sermons, and poems. African Americans called him the kind of leader we were taught didn't exist. And then, in the quiet of rising tension, Captain Traoré released one final message, a video just 43 seconds long, staring directly into the camera. Voice steady, eyes unshaken. He said, "This is not just about oil. This is not just about gold. This is about the soul of Africa. And I would rather die standing than live kneeling." The screen faded to black. Within hours, it spread to every corner of the continent, shared by young people, elders, teachers, and even former heads of state. Many called it the speech of a generation. Western intelligence was stunned. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had the tools: money, drones, media. But what they no longer had was trust. And they couldn't comprehend. You cannot intimidate a people who have already chosen to be free. And Traoré, he had become more than a leader. He had become a movement, a fire, a reminder. In schools, children drew him standing with a lion. In markets, loudspeakers echoed his speech. In churches and mosques, his name was spoken in reverence. He wasn't supposed to survive. He wasn't supposed to resist. But here he was rising. No billionaires, no PR firm, just courage, clarity, and people ready to defend their future. And now, The latest news out of Burkina Faso was no longer a threat. It was a message to the world. This wasn't just another headline. This was history written in real time, not by empires, but by a people who refused to bow. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't negotiate with threats. He didn't tremble before power. He stood firm, not as a dictator, not as a pawn, but as a symbol of something greater. A sovereign soul, a continent rising. The latest news from Burkina Faso wasn't about oil or gold anymore. It was about pride, dignity, a fire that couldn't be bought, bullied, or bribed. And when the world expected fear, what it got was resolve. From the crowded streets of Lagos to the dusty schools of Ouagadougou, from black barbershops in Chicago to cafes in Accra, a single truth echoed loud and clear. Africa is no longer for sale. Captain Ibrahim Traoré lit a match in a room full of dry paper. And what followed was not chaos, it was clarity. The old games no longer worked. The silent theft, the quiet control. The backdoor deals, they were now exposed, challenged, rejected. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something long overdue. A continent finally standing not just in opposition, but in unity. The young, the old, the diaspora, the dreamers, all watching, all rising, all ready to write the next chapter on their own terms. So now we ask you, what comes next? Will more leaders rise? Will more nations join the stand? Will Africa finally speak in one voice? If this story stirred something in your spirit, speak it, share it. Let your voice join the chorus. Because this isn't just Captain Ibrahim latest news. This is our news. This isn't just Burkina Faso latest news. This is Africa's new chapter. And if this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe, because they hid our history long enough. Now, let's speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story. The kind they still don't want you to hear.